welcome back to the Decision 2024. We're 5 days out. We got the weekend, Monday, Tuesday, and it's here. We have today our final call and big polling numbers that have come out, as well as early voting numbers. I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc.
I'm Amy Dangerfield. Now, week to week, we usually bring you Rasmussen reports, which typically have shown Trump in the lead. However, this now marks the very first time in RCP's aggregate where we see Trump ahead in the national polls. He's ahead by 0.1%. However, this marks a significant time throughout this election cycle and even previous ones, because typically liberals are the ones who dominate when it comes to the popular vote. So with Trump ahead by 0.1%, that just means that if there is any left lean to these polls whatsoever, he's actually up ahead by much more than that 0.1.
Words talk, numbers scream, and these numbers are screaming that there has been a significant tightening on a national level. Will Trump win the popular vote? We think that there is a better than 50-50 chance, and rising even as we're 5 days away, that he does.
Let's talk about early voting. We have some of the numbers that have come in, and we can see that when it comes to the west coast of the United States and the two main swing states that we're focusing on here, Arizona and Nevada, we can see that out of all of the ballots that have been requested, 23% have been submitted when it comes to Arizona. And of those, 42% come from the Republican side. Now, does this mean that all of those votes are going to go Republican? Possibly not. We're looking at about 90% of those are probably going to swing Republican. Likewise, to the 36% that have voted early for Democrats, about 90% of those will swing that way. Now, this marks a significant shift because, once again, when we look at prior elections, typically Democrats tend to dominate when it comes to early voting. When we go down to Nevada, we can see that it's a very similar story. Out of all of the 20% of early ballots that have been requested, 39% have been cast on the Republican side, versus when you look at the Democrats, 36%, so slightly in the lead there for the Republicans, and a total of 35% when it comes to the independents.
What's very interesting about this is we can make some interpretations. This translates to a 53-46. That's a 7-point spread. So that means in early voting, we believe that Donald Trump has about a 5-point lead in early voting, with about 2 points going for the alternative candidates, Libertarian and Green Party. This is better than the Republican Party has done in the last 4 elections on early voting, which means that the ground game for the Republicans is dramatically improved from the previous elections. Now, Election Day is a whole nother matter because it's all about turnout and who can get them out. But before we go there, let's look at more states on the early voting.
So when we compare this current election cycle to that of previous ones, we can see that there is a solid 9-point shift when it comes to Nevada. When you look at 2020 versus 2024, the Republicans are definitely making their mark when it comes to early voting, and very similar when it comes to Arizona as well.
And to break that down further for you, in 2020, Democrats had a 10 percentage point advantage on the early voting. Ballots that were returned registered to Democrats versus independents or Republicans. This year, the Republicans have a 7-point lead on that. So now look at the dramatic difference in there. That's a huge difference, and that is why when we do quantitative analysis of this, extrapolate a little bit, believe that Trump has about a 5-point lead in Arizona on early voting.
And so now we move over to the East Coast and we take a look at some of the other swing states over there, North Carolina and Georgia, 2 states that were very much affected by Hurricane Helene. And we were a little bit concerned about voter suppression that may be happening there due to these circumstances. However, early voting actually looks pretty promising. By comparison to previous election cycles, we can see that when it comes to North Carolina, they're actually split. Out of all of the 31 early voter ballots that have been requested and handed in, we can see that it is a deadlock between Republicans and Democrats, both split at 34%. And then when it comes to the independents, they are at 38% overall. Now, we move down to Georgia and we see that it's a very similar story. Republicans are ahead marginally, just by 1 point. We can see that out of 31% of early voter ballots that have been turned in, that Republicans are up 44% compared to Democrats 43%, and the independents are coming in at 29%.
So now let's go to the blue wall. Look at early voting up north where fall is upon us. It's starting to get chilly, but the voting is heating up. If you take a look, interesting in Wisconsin, 50% of the ballots returned. Only 16% of the early ballots have been returned, but 50% of them are Republican registration, 33% Democrat. When you put the independents in there, it's 38. You take a little bit more than a 6-4 split here, that's 18 on this, 18 on 38, 48, 56. I think that's higher than it's going to be, but it's early days. But it also shows that in early voting, Donald Trump has a lead. Extrapolating the data, because we can't see inside these votes, but we can extrapolate them based on polling and historical voting trends by people who have registered Republican versus people registered Democrats, and the all-important independents. Likewise, when you go to Michigan, the independent split is even less pronounced, but when you take a closer look here, Michigan was seen to be a toss-up. Right now, Kamala Harris would have a bit of a lead, probably 2 points in Michigan in early voting when you take the independents and you extrapolate it all out. Actually, maybe a little more than that, maybe 2 to 3 points. Then you go down to Pennsylvania, and you can see here where in early voting, 15% is returned, but when you put those independents in there, look what happens. A 60-point advantage on early voting with the independents on all that were requested and people in person early. Guess what? Now it's a little bit different. It's split maybe half to a point in Trump's favor. However, typically the GOP has not enjoyed any sort of an extrapolated lead in early voting. Typically, they turn out better and vote heavier on Election Day.
Now, you'll remember that several weeks ago, maybe even a month or so ago, Tom and I brought New Hampshire to your attention and said that this may be a battleground state. Now that we've analyzed the early voting data, that we have may actually been correct. When we take a look at all of the ballots that have been returned early, 33% of those are dominated by the Republicans, which marks a 3-point lead compared to the Democrats. Now, when we take a look at some of the other states here, we can see that Minnesota is also one of these battlegrounds. Very interesting considering the fact that Kamala Harris selected Tim Walz of Minnesota as her vice presidential candidate. I bet she's maybe regretting not picking Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. However, we can see now that Republicans are actually up ahead when it comes to early voting in Minnesota. Out of all of the early ballots that have been returned, 41% of those are coming from the Republicans versus 36% on the Democratic side, and 28% is the independent vote. We move down one more and we're taking a look at Virginia. Now, there have been rumors that Donald Trump is actually going to be campaigning in Virginia this week, which is very interesting because it means that they have some type of internal numbers, internal polling that is determining that this is a worthwhile place for them to be campaigning during the final week of the election. When we take a look at the early ballots that have been returned, which is 22%, about 42% of those have come from the Republican side versus 51% on the Democrats. However, this marks a very big difference between previous election cycles, making Virginia now a true battleground in the 2024 election.
We're now going to take a closer look at Pennsylvania. And if you take a look at what is happening back here, there are some liberal polls that are in here. Certainly not Trafalgar, that typically leans a little bit to the right or has been balanced and had a reputation for accuracy in the last election, as did Atlas Intel and Rasmussen. But look here, Emerson has Trump 1, Bloomberg is Harris 2. When you put it together, Trump's at 1.6.
But there's other drama in Pennsylvania, right, Tom?
Indeed, there is. In Lancaster County, there is a district attorney has indicated that allegedly there were some applications that were taken by people that were unauthorized to be registering voters or something, or impersonating or doing it inappropriately. Whatever they're allegedly have done, the net is they found several hundred illicit registrations, which they believe could have been turned into requests for absentee or mail-in ballots, which then, of course, get filled out because no one knows where they're being sent, multiple sent to addresses. They bundle them together, vote, make a fake signature on it to align with the name that they've registered to, and dump those ballots in for counting. That's the typical scheme And in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, they say they're on top of it and they've grabbed bundles of these votes, getting after the bad actors. It just goes to show how important the inspectors and people being alert at the polls is in this election cycle. For people to say there's no fraud, they cannot be certain on that, because you can certainly not say in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, there was no fraud attempted. There's the attempt right here. Let's go all the way out west to Nevada.
We can see that Harris and Trump are in a virtual deadlock right now. Based on the last 5 recent and reputable polls, they're both at 47.6%. Several of the pollsters here have them at a tie. We're talking about Atlas Intel, Insider Advantage. And then when it comes to Bloomberg and Trafalgar, they do have Harris up by 1%. And then finally, Rasmussen has Trump up by 2, with 748 likely voters. Now, let's go next door to Arizona. We can see that Trump is up ahead by 1.8% once again, and we can see that he's ahead in all of the most recent reputable polls, aside from, once again, Bloomberg. With their 915 likely voters, it is a virtual deadlock at 49-49. And with that, now it's time for our Valuetainment Call. This is the culmination of all of the data that you just saw, plus our own aggregate through VT Analytics to bring you our call now just 1 weekend from the election. So, Tom, with 1 weekend to go, what are we seeing?
We have Trump up at 82%, and I will walk you through it. We believe Georgia and Arizona are in the lean category, meaning those, I cannot call them safe, but if there's any left lean in the polls, which are already showing a lean, then they are strongly leaning toward Trump. We believe North Carolina is a lean as well, but we all need to wait and find out how the voting in this outlying western area toward the Tennessee border shakes out, because that's the hurricane-affected areas. There are people in the Democrat and Republican parties trying to get them first healthy and safe and get back on their feet following the hurricane, but also in the midst of that, allowing them to participate in the single most important election of our generation. So North Carolina, we believe it's a lean, but if there's 50,000 votes out here that cannot be counted that are expected to be in the 78% Republican range, then that means that North Carolina is still a toss-up, although we categorize it for Trump at this hour. Pennsylvania, we believe it's getting very close to being a lean. I think it's 2.5 points now, Trump, based on all of our analysis. If you put that together and you take Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, early in the evening, if it goes this way, we are headed toward 270 lock-in without Arizona and Nevada. We have Nevada for Trump, although it's more of a toss-up, but we think there's just enough data that we're seeing there that we believe it could go to Trump. It's a 6 electoral vote swing, and you can see we're at 82% for 270 and above, with a current estimate, if all of this came true, of 302, long before the polls even close in California, Arizona, Washington, Oregon, and the Pacific Coast. So that's how we see it on the last weekend. If this is going to come true, all Americans need to vote. Grab 5 people, take them with you. Check in on people that are older in your neighborhood. Did they get a mail-in ballot? Did they not? Can you help them get to the polls and to do what we do in a free country, which is vote, with people fighting to ensure that the integrity of our elections are in place.
Thank you so much for watching with us all these weeks and following our weekly electoral map predictions. Now, as we're heading into the election, we would like to formally invite you to come and watch with us as this historic event takes place next Tuesday night. The PBD podcast is going to be holding a live stream from 6 p.m., honestly till about 2 a.m. in the morning, maybe even later, as we track everything that's going down in each of the swing states. We'll be bringing you data in real time. And if you can just so happen to make it to the live event in person, check out the link down below and we would love to see you there. As always, thank you so much for watching and tuning in. My name is Amy Dangerfield.
And I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc. This last weekend is the last weekend that the candidates will be talking, their handlers will be putting the spin, the media will be probably lying one way or the other, but the numbers will be screaming, and let the number of your vote scream loudest. See you on Tuesday night.